Welcome to the ANU Indonesia Project Global Seminar. My name is Arianto Patundru, and I would like to start by acknowledging and celebrating the first Australians whose traditional lands I'm chairing this webinar on, and pay my respect to the elders past and present. We are grateful for the support from the Australian National University and the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Today, we will discuss the April 2026 issue of the Survey of Recent Development that is published in the Bulletin of Indonesian Economic Studies, BIES. It is open access, and we'll put the link in the Q&A box so you can download them. To those who don't know, BIES is the premier journal on Indonesian economic development hosted here at the ANU. The journal publishes three issues every year, and each issue always start with the survey of recent development. The authors of the current survey are Dr. Krishna Gupta from CHIPS, Center for Indonesian Policy Studies in Jakarta, but he is at the moment in Narita Airport. Dr. Riyandi Laksono from Center for Indonesian Strategic Studies, International and Strategic Studies, CSIS in Jakarta, but he is now in Amsterdam. And Dr. Rizky Siregar, Kiki, from LPEM FEB UI, University of Indonesia. We are grateful for their availability to share their highlights of their paper with us. It is titled Prabowonomics, Can Indonesia Really Grow at 8%? As usual, we will have Q&A session after the talks, but if you want, you can write your question anytime on the Q&A box, not on the chat box. We'll attend to them after the presentation or whenever I see fit. You can also ask verbally later on by raising your virtual hand. And finally, please also kindly respond to the little polling on your screen because we need it to improve our series. Thank you so much. And without further ado, let me invite the authors to present their paper. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Pa Acho. So glad to be here. Yeah, fortunately, I was wrongly timed my flight, so I had to do it here in the airport. I hope there's no loud voices, but my two other colleagues are more. This is
Sorry, Imet, I think your voice is broken. Maybe Riandi and Rizky, you can take over before we get it back to Krishna.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, I'll just buying some time so that Krishna can return to the Zoom room. So
Yeah.
thank you very much for attending our today's discussion. As Pak Jo said, is the title is Prabowonomics, Can Indonesia Really Grow at 8%? So the motivation to create this paper is basically to produce a systematic review of what has been done by Prabowo administration for the past one and a half year, more systematically and more structured in a structured way. So I see Krishna already returned.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
I'll give it back to Krishna.
Okay,
Good.
thanks for covering. So let's head straight to the next slide. So we sort of arranged the presentation with these three main headline. First is, of course, we're going to bring the updates, mostly on macro, labor, and fiscal. And then we're going to discuss about the Prabowonomics itself, what we think, what it means by Prabowonomics, and we can sort of dissect whether these are a good strategy to pursue 8% growth. Well, you know, TLDR, we're not very convinced, but then we sort of provide some sort of improvement, if you like. sort of evaluate how to actually do what we want, which is the 8% growth. Is it impossible? We really don't think so. We can, but with a certain adjustment, let's say. Next, please. Yeah, so some updates. Next again. So the highlight, we probably first want to share about the GDP growth, right? As per the previous SRD, the early stages of the current 2025 year was kind of slow, mainly because the government expenditure in the first 2 quarters was kind of late to start, right? It was actually shrinked, but then improved in the later year. Which allows us to grow 5.11%. Which, yeah, the fourth quarter really upped the overall yearly growth. But from the graph, we can sort of see the main feature of that graph on the left is the volatility, food and energy inflation that's creeping up a little bit. And in fact, the current numbers also show the same thing, right? Inflation, the food and energy kind of going up, except of course the electricity at the PLN price. But apart from that, these food prices are creeping up, albeit the overall inflation are still in the bandwidth of Bank Indonesia's target. However, we don't really see that we're heading toward the 8%, judging from the past development of the Indonesian economic growth. So yeah, next please. And yeah, of course, programs also start slow, which is now starting to move, but my two other colleagues will explain why we're still not convinced. But jobs is now one of the main feature that we want to highlight as well. One of the a good thing from the labor market is the unemployment rate that's dropping. Yeah. We have a lower unemployment in 2025. However, having said that, if we dig deep enough, some of these jobs that we gained are in the low productivity sectors, like almost half comes from low productivity sectors, which typically informal service, low value added services, and only 10% of those employment get full-time jobs in 2025 versus 43% in 2024. That's a lot of drop. And manufacturing hires typically quite high, like a percent can probably give you like 400,000 a long time ago. But these days, the 5% growth only gave us 0.3 million workers for manufacturing. So the 5% growth, it can feel like slow for the people who actually get the job in low productivity sector, unfortunately. So when you hear people keep saying that growth doesn't really translate to jobs, this is probably what the numbers kind of suggest that, yeah, the growth is heading towards the low productivity sectors. Next, please. Fiscal, yeah. So we see that the revenue, the one of the drivers. So Indonesia in 2025 reached a deficit of 2.9% of GDP, which is very close to 3% legal fiscal rule. And the main driver of that, if we can call it main driver, is the reduction of income. So the huge reduction of income, pardon me, my eyes a little bit, is coming from the domestic taxes, which is mainly income taxes. Right. So these drop relates to also a weak government expenditure overall year. As we mentioned, the first 2 quarters government expenditure actually went to a negative territory. Now, having said that, the 2026 budget, though, however, is kind of very sort of ambitious, so to speak. We know that the first quarter of the government revenue is actually bouncing up, so probably, albeit from a lower base, right? But we could say that core tax is finally working as intended. But still, I mean, the target, it requires some kind of a tax reform or more effort that we are currently having. Next, please. Now, we highlighted two main events that happened during our cover months. The first one is MSCI. The event where Indonesian capital market when the capital market was halt trading experienced a trading halt twice in a row around January, after MSCI's index fund manager mentioned that Indonesia's capital market is not transparent enough, right? It's a bit hard to analyze Indonesian capital market. And the consultation from MSCI to Indonesian IDX manager happened around October in 2025, which kind of suggested from the picture on the left, there's a deviation from the index fund to the IDX GCI, the Jakarta Composite Index, around a similar time. And according to them, it's hard to analyze how much actually being traded in Indonesian IDX because the ownership is not clear, and the stock that can actually be traded is lower than suggested, is lower compared to the neighboring capital market, like the countries in ASEAN. So yeah, that leads to lots of capital flight, which also reducing Indonesian portfolio liabilities, as you can see on the table on the right. Current account is less negative, but that's mainly because investment that's coming to Indonesia is dropping compared to the last year. So there's some sort of a problem with the investing confidence in Indonesia from the foreigners, apparently. And unless this is fixed, it's kind of hard to attract more fundings, external fundings to Indonesia. Next, please. Of course, the next event is the flood disaster in Sumatra. Floods and landslide in Aceh, North Sumatra, and West Sumatra forced at least 1 million people to evacuate. UE LPEM estimates that flood affected 9.3 million workers, showing how these climate shocks spill into the labor market. And of course, potentially, suppose there's another climate disaster, effect is probably going to be huge. 53 district affected, more than 1,200 deaths, 175,000 homes destroyed, and lots of bridges are affected. Estimated loss is 332 trillion, and these disasters kind of show the capacity that is constrained of the local and central government to actually help with the recovery, mainly because of the budget problem. My two colleagues are going to explain a little bit more in here. So, BNPB, the Indonesian body that deals with this situation, only have half day of MBG day. So one MBG days is Riandi will explain a little bit more. Yeah, Riandi. So yeah, basically, long story short, they don't really have enough funding because of the fiscal that is, we think, could be improved. So yeah, those two showing, one, the Indonesian investment climate to attract external fund, and two, the showcase of a potential more disaster to come and low capacity to actually fix them, like how to react is kind of constrained by the fiscal. So we explain this a little bit more in the next slides, and I will hand over to Rizky Siregar for the next presentation. Please take it away, Rizky.
Thank you so much, Imet. Hello, everyone. I'm going to continue our survey of recent development after a very, let me say, festive update of the past of the period that we have to cover. Lots happening. We would like to kind of like provide an overlooking effort to also see not only the short-term dynamics, but also what's in it for the long run. So that's why we cover issues on, and how we can improve our growth trajectory for the medium run and long run. So in this part of the presentation and in the paper, you can see that we are trying to lay out issues with the current implementation of Prabowonomics. So what we see is that in general, the government have been very creative and very energetic in boosting growth, which we should appreciate. I think they have been using lots of new kind of tools that we kind of classified into three big room. One is through the demand push, some macro support that is also quite extraordinary, and the last one is state expansion and increasing role of the state. What we will see later on, and as we go one by one, we find that the way that the government have been, or the administration have been trying to tackle, the reluctance of the growth from increasing from 5% to 8% seems to create disconnect between the problems, the actual problem that limit growth, with the proposed solutions. And this disconnection actually worsens resource misallocation through two mechanisms. The first one is due to the opportunity cost of the problems or the issues and challenges that the chosen policies in boosting aggregate demand that the government have been using. And the other one, of course, is the opportunity cost of not tackling the real issues, for example, in improving competition and innovation in what we should see as our new engine of growth, perhaps through certain industry or sectors. So in the first part, we will cover demand, how the demand push policies has been done, the macro support, and then the state expansion in details. Yeah. So first, let me go through how the government have been using the flagship programs as kind of engine of growth. And in some instances, they have been framing these flagship programs, including the free nutritious meal program, the cooperative, village cooperative program, as sort of industrial policy on its own, and also food estate, although it's not yet pushed for this first year. But the idea, what we see is that many of these programs are large, yeah, they require big resources, and hence also it seems the idea is well intended. They want to provide big stimulus to many parts of the country. But however, the implementation seems to be not backed by improve or thoughtful theory of change. Yeah. Sorry, I think I need to shut down first my WhatsApp, but let me just go through. So if we think of theory of change, we have inputs, and then we would like to find how intervention like MBG or KDMP can transform input into outcomes. Yeah. But what we see is that many of these flagship programs focus on outputs only, like for example, how many meals being delivered, how many cooperatives being projects has been assigned, and sometimes even not the output, but rather the inputs, like how many kitchens has been built, how many cooperative buildings have been built, yeah, or how many lands have been cleared, without putting it into the framework of how we can measure the outcome later on, or even providing a transparent and measurable performance indicator of the outcome of the policy itself. So we find that this missing connection between input output into outcome may, with such a resource that we have been committed to, may cloud our ability and also reduce our ability to create the big bucks from, the big impact from our money. Yeah. The next one is again, the next issue is, of course, the targeting issues. So, of course, we would like to target these programs based on the problems. Yeah. So we would like, for example, to use MBG or the free nutritious meal as a way to improve nutrition. However, it means that not everyone is, lack of nourishment, but what we see so far is that it has been implemented universally. However, we would like also to mention that it seems there is some improvement in the past couple of weeks, that perhaps there will be reallocation in terms of target in the form of retargeting of the MBG, and we are very excited to know further what will be the new targeting that they are aiming now. On the other hand, for example, if you think of Sekolah Rakyat, we would like to provide, of course, quality education for all. However, here we have been seeing the Sekolah Rakyat or the provision of quality education only to targeted persons. So this not only which performance indicators that reflect outcome that we should see is missing, but on top of it, the targeting itself is also doesn't really speak with the problem that they are trying to solve. Yeah. Okay, the second one is about macro solutions, and the government have been quite creative, if I may say. So we have been seeing more state-directed liquidity in the form of, and starting with what Imet have been mentioning also, for example, the government have pushed some fund that they have put in the central bank as a new credit source. And what we see here on top of it, that they have been also calling the burden sharing program is being called upon again. This is not the first time the government, and the central bank coordinated in the form of burden sharing, and the first one was happening in the pandemic crisis. So many questions, of course, the urgency and whether this is the right time to use such another policy when we do not have crisis. On top of it, we actually grow quite well with 5%. Why we do have to use a crisis tool in a time that is not crisis? So the outcome is what we see on the left panel, that the Bank Indonesia becomes, or the central bank becomes, the larger holder of government debt. Central bank is this slightly gray, dark gray. So this one, and of course has been now is the biggest share of the holder of the government debt. On the right hand side of the idea is that when the government push more supply of loanable fund, perhaps this will be in the intention is to increase credit growth, right? So to increase growth through investment. On the right hand side, we can see that the dark gray line, which is investment, has been quite stable or stagnant throughout 2025, but increased highly in the last part of the year. However, this coincides with the presidential instruction for Agrinas, one of the state-owned company, to finance and to build 80,000 buildings of cooperatives with a loan of 240 million rupiah. This loan will mature in the next 6 years, and we find that this increase are substantially reflecting this instruction to build the KDMP without clear outcome that the increase in money placement from the central bank and also from the government have stimulate more private sector demand for credits. Yeah. So the takeaway is that the increased investment is good, the idea is good, but we need to be careful in pushing it when we do have the actual problem, which is low market confidence. Okay. The other arm of the Prabowonomics has been increasing role of the state, and we have seen at least two arm that, or two how we call it, yeah, how two colors that have been used. One is Danantara as the big SOE right now, the holding of the SOE, and on top of it, the SOE expansion. And on the second one, and the increasing role of military and police in the civic roles, in many civic roles. Yeah. Let me go through the Danantara and SOE expansion first. When we write this survey, it was actually also a good timing to talk about this, and we take note that at least the two previous survey have been also tackling the issues about Danantara. But during the time when we write it, starting November, the revision of the law of state-owned enterprise have been concluded. So the last one was happened in October. So if you take into, let me remind you, there have been like a big change in the law, and the law even being revised twice in the past year only. So what we cover here is about how Danantara can be potentially a new engine of growth, and whether the way they have been running it in the past 1 year have been in that pathway to do that. So the first one, let's go over the mandate. Actually, the whole morning today, I have been talking about the Danantara for the past 5 hours. I have lots of materials to cover, but many questions, and I think we all questions here, like how Danantara can position themselves in tackling two mandates. One is, of course, the mandate in managing sovereign wealth, but also the other mandate is becoming the development arm. Yeah. So are you going to be sovereign wealth fund, just like in the Norway sovereign wealth fund, or are you going to be a development bank? Or on top of it, Danantara still has 70 SOE, in which almost around 75% of SOE are public service obligation, has public service obligation, and hence need to provide services to the public. So how is Danantara managing all of this mandate, and how do they prioritize this? This has not been well answered so far. We know that we put lots of ambition to Danantara, but this is something that Danantara needs to take into account and provide guidance in how we should see their performance, what kind of performance indicator that we need to also see, so that to have to manage our expectation too, right, on this role on these big mandates. The second one is that the new law of SOE provide Danantara with new special assignment. Yeah, so special assignment to SOE is not new. This is something that has been governed also in previous law, but there's new thing that is given to SOE now, which is development. Yeah, so previously there is no special assignment to do development, but now there is a development is a new special assignment. However, development can mean many things, right? For example, I can develop, my own hobby, but I can also develop, a new ability to a new skill. So in the form of SOE, this can be quite problematic when this new special assignment is not based on, the mandate, right? This may be politically driven with weak discipline. When it is specially assigned and instructed by the president, there is no way that the Danantara can say no. The third issue is, of course, governance. Yeah, I think the issue of conflict of interest was actually the motivation of why we have transformed the way we manage the state-owned enterprise into the way we manage it now as Danantara. However, the current setup seems not to improve conflict of interest when they show conflict of interest in the broad daylight. Yeah, when, as we know, as everyone knows, at least at the leadership level, the Minister of Investment is also the CEO of Danantara. The head of the the regulator of Danantara is actually the COO of Danantara. So this overlap and this intersection of roles across the talent seems actually weaken the ability of Danantara to overcome its main motivation to be built, which is to solve conflict of interest issues. The last but not least is we have been listening to ideas and no, not ideas. Actually, they have started to implement it. Danantara aim to consolidate massively, yeah, from one, and also restructure massively. So the next question is about whether they also take into account competition risk and whether they will crowd out private sector dynamism instead of crowd in private sector. So the new stuff that's also governed in the SOE law is that monopoly rights can be given to Danantara without a new law. So this may reduce competition instead of bolster competition, which is our main ingredients usually for a successful industrial policy. So we try to cover this as you know, knowing that the Nantara is only 1 year old. However, of course, the big the big risks that also have been mentioned in the previous surveys, for example, the too big to fail risk, which is moral hazard risk, the contingency risk that may weaken macro stability persists. So, and also the corporation risk, conglomeration also, since they are going to be consolidated, and hence whether it will actually increase systemic risk in certain industry, for example, banking, also persists. So, but we did not put emphasis on that, but taking into account that this risk also is in the background. On the other arm of the increased state role is military and police civic role. We have been seeing it in many types. Yeah, one is, you know, the instruction for military and police to also speed up and accelerate the delivery of flagship programs, including, you know, the military and the police have thousands of kitchens of MBG, the involvement of them in building cooperatives building. Yeah, so one is on one side is the assignment for them to also do implementation. The second one is that many of the civic role leadership have been assigned to a military and police, not only the one that have been retired, but also the one that are still you know, not yet retired. So the risk here is, of course, concerns on abuse of power and whether this is the right person to lead such, you know, civic roles, you know. So of course the question is again merit, whether we are giving the right talent for the certain task. Yeah, although this is not super obvious, but we take into account that for private sector and business climate, this may also reduce private sector dynamism when, you know, private sector have to be head to head with, you know, military and police assignment in many of the delivery of the flagship programs and also regulation. So having said that, I'm going to give the next last issues on fiscal, and Riandi will then take over on how things can be speed up instead. Thank you.
Thank you, Ki. So I'll continue with the other issues with Prabowonomics. One of it is how fiscal spending has been designed, how fiscal policy has been designed, and there is none other program that encapsulate the idea of Prabowonomics better than MBG, makanan bergizi gratis. And MBG is very close to our heart, especially as a parents. At one point, we need to deal with like the school meal program being delivered to our children, and we need to say yes or no. So this is very close to our heart as well, especially me as a parent. So I think when we make this BS, I try to talk with some of informally to some of the inner circle of Prabowo, and it helps us to understand how it's being thought of, because the narrative out there is that MBG is good, but it's just the implementation. We would like to further argue that it's not only the implementation part, but how it is thought of. So the concept of it, the design of it is already problematic from the very beginning. At least there are two theory of change that Rizky mentioned before about theory of change. the theory of change that drive MBK, at least there are two. First is that so Prabowo's administration has been imagining the economy that is driven by agriculture sector and rural economy. So as much as possible, money should go there. Instead of the second theory of change is that instead of being put into other sectors or other allocation that are leaking or bocor, he often said bocor, and instead of getting bocor everywhere, it's better to disperse it as a food program. At least the children can eat it and the people can feel the benefit of it and things like that. So those two theory of change is the one that is driving how MBG is being architected. So we know for sure right now MBG is not only nutritional program, but MBG is also a growth driver. But the studies actually that are actually emerging for the school meal program is that the benefit of school meal program is more in the long term. Is the nutritional impact, is the learning impact, and it's the enrollment impact. There is no conclusive evidence that the school meal program can enhance growth and reduce poverty, at least in the short to medium run. And look at how big the MBG has been designated. So 1.4% of GDP this year, compared to other countries like India, 0.06, and Bhutan, 0.13. India is already under experiencing with the school meal program for quite some time. And MBG is not only important because of the scale in the economy, but in fiscal space, almost half of central education budget, this is the central budget, not the regional one, almost half of it is allocated through BGN. This is the Badan Gizi Nasional, right? And if you look at the overall budget of education is one third, around one third. So because of this theory of change, scale is more important than the quality. So for example, every kitchen needs to deliver 3,000 until 4,000 meal portion per day, and the schedule is very hectic. They need to buy a lot of ingredient at night, and they need to cook it, finish in the morning, and then they need to distribute it during the lunch program. So it's no wonder that the poisoning is increasing, and it increasing coincidentally with the improvement in the rollout. Because if we remember, during the first two quarter last year, the rollout is very low, and then it slowed down also the budget absorption. But what's at what cost? The infrastructure gets squeezed, teachers' expenditure also gets squeezed, and also disaster response. So actually, the theory of change behind it is not tested yet. Is it really true that improving budget into agriculture and restaurant sector is better than allocating to infrastructure and perhaps into manufacturing? And also don't forget the hotel sector and also accommodation sector is being impacted also because of the meeting budget being slashed. So that theory of change has not been tested properly. Next. So we know about the problem and we know about the updates. So what's our recommendation or proposal with regards to promoting a higher growth path? So before we delve into detail on what the recipe, I want to bring you to the logic of football because I'm a fan of football, game of soccer. So in soccer, you need two lines, right? Defensive lines and attacking lines. This is not something to take for granted because today there has been discussion on sacrificing a little bit stability for growth. We do not prescribe that view because in any soccer game you need both a good defensive line and a good offensive line. There is no Manchester City without Ruben Dias, and there is no Arsenal without William Saliba, for example, for those of you that are soccer fans. And but also in attacking lines, Manchester City have Haaland and Arsenal also, even though they don't have striker right now, but they're trying to buy their attacking lines. So for us, the stability is the defensive lines. So that prevent you from getting stumbled into instability and making sure everything is investable in Indonesian economy. But at the end of the day, you need to have an attacking lines. So it's not that you only need defensive line, but you need both defensive and attacking lines. So let me start with the defensive lines. Fiscal credibility is everything. That's represent the core center back in a soccer game, right? So fiscal credibility. And it's not about only the discipline. The problem is we are not clear yet whether our spending is allocated into the more productive and having a good economic and social return. So it's not only about discipline, but also the composition. It is already a good progress that government considering to target MBG better. But I think this is I think the proof that hard times create a good policy. Probably still waiting for that. But targeting MBG is for sure we need that. We need to focus on the undernourished region, undernourished student, and those that are need this program more. And we need to spend better. Actually, the initiative to reallocate or to make spending more efficient is actually good in the start of 2025, but it is not guided by clear framework which allocation is better and which allocation is wasteful. It is not guided by that. It is guided by political campaign. There is no clear guardrail on what constitutes a good return or not good return. So we want that more institutionalized. And preserve a spending that can flourish a productive space like infrastructure for manufacturing or for productive sectors, improve teachers' quality and other growth enabling spending. This is why I think fiscal policy need to have a good, a good evidence base to determine really this is productive spending, this is not productive spending. We do not see that right now yet. And the last part of the fiscal credibility is that we need to plan our expenditure around realistic tax capacity. The budget in 2026 is built around the assumption that income tax will raise 21%. That's not realistic at all. And that assuming the tax to GDP ratio of, I think, around 10.5%. So right now it's still 9.3. So we need to jump from 9.3 to 10.5. So it's built around that. That's before Iran. That's before Middle East crisis. So even before that, it's not realistic at all. So now, after Iran crisis, it creates more difficulty to make it more realistic. So we face two additional problem right now. Next. The other defensive lines is the monetary authority. We need to make sure that we need to protect BI credibility to avoid further erosion of the central bank independence. We need to diagnose really why capital is not mobilized properly yet, instead of adding a state-directed credit, because state-directed credit can instead also create more misallocation if not guided properly. But it is better to always start with what's the problem and let's address those problems. Why is that important? Because by having a credible center back, as I would say, is just like creating this anchor that allows firms to sustainably investing and sustainably innovating without the risk of instability in the future. So we are not in the argument that guardrails is not important. Guardrails is not anti-growth. They are the proper center back that any soccer game need. So they are the defensive line of any good soccer game. So next, but to achieve the 8%, you definitely need Erling Haaland, right? You definitely need Didier Drogba and Chelsea's time on whatever, and Thierry Henry for Arsenal. So you need a good attacking lines. Our proposition is that we need to have attacking strategy that attack the productivity problem that are hindering key growth engines, including in manufacturing sectors. If you see the narrative during Prabowo's administration, like the last 1.5 years, the whole narrative is about what? MBG. It's about red white cooperative. The only one instance when Prabowo really care about supply side issues is when the Trump is threatening with the reciprocal tariff. That's all. The local content. If you remember, Prabowo is gathering all the economists and business sector, and he's promising that the local content is being reformed, and there is no promise that a business sector will get protection from the import side. They want to basically reform everything that are asked by the U.S. The pressure is good to reform. Actually, we need that kind of pressure. The ART, Agreement of Reciprocal Trade, have their own problem, but I think we don't see much progress in terms of the supply side reform within this Prabowo administration. So we would also like to take this opportunity to advance our idea of productivity-centered industrial policy. Doesn't matter what what you want to call it, but our idea here is to gear industrial policy or intervention into something that can still preserve productivity rather than just boost your production. So first big part of the story of industrial policy is that the global supply chain has been undergoing a great reallocation. And this is the opportunity for Global South like Indonesia to attract those relocating companies. So local content, import restriction goes against that goal actually to attract export-oriented manufacturing. But then after we invited export-oriented manufacturing, there is this legitimate objective to wanting to build more capability upside value chain or downstream. Then the issue after that is how to use industrial policy to target the market failure that we have. What is it? Is it about the learning failure, or is it about the knowledge lacking of knowledge? We need to target those issues rather than a blanket trade protection, for example. So always use that. And how do we do that? The core principle is to minimize collusion. So the idea is very general, which is engaging private sector at arm's length. We know this, but we never do this. Indonesia never do this. And all the talk about trade protection or temporary trade protection, like anti-dumping duties, for example, has been going forever for like 10, 11, 15 years. That's a very long-term protection. And also countervailing duties and all that, that should be temporary, that creates a permanence in the protection. So carrot and stick condition needs to be enhanced. And the core point here is to use export market and domestic rivalry as a tool to disciplinizing firms. So this is the conditionality that industrial policy that our productivity center needs to have. So whatever tools that you do, make sure it is targeting market failure, and second, still allowing competition to be alive. That's the core thing to make sure that fiscal spending is properly directed into good channel for the public purposes. And the last part is when it doesn't work, we need to know when to stop. So basically, the exit strategy is important. This is very straightforward, I know, but it's never been done properly for Indonesia case. So that's the supply side strategy that we think is lacking, and Prabowo administration need to tackle more. And our answer to those of you that are waiting for the answer, can Indonesia really grow 8%? My answer is still the same as 2 years ago when I was in the Indonesian Update Conference. Perhaps no, especially not in the first term, but we can optimistically say that Indonesia can grow faster than 5%. But then the current strategy is still lacking and still not aligned with that task. We still see that it is mostly demand centered and state-led centered. Even for industrialization, it still rely on the resource-based industrialization, but there is no coherent supply side reform or industrial policy strategy that are anchored in productivity or boosting trade and participation in the global market that are providing us with the much needed competition. We don't see that yet, and that's the path that government needs to pursue more. We want to hear more discussion about the supply side reform because we all know that that's been lacking. But this paper is also want to be that part of the reminder that yes, you want growth, but you haven't started to work on the domestic homework properly, and we need to start to tackle that. Thank you. That's from us, and we like to thank all the reviewer that for our paper, and let's discuss it more in the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yandi, Krishna, Rizky, for very comprehensive presentation. And for those of you who just joined, again, you can download the paper. It's open access. We have provided in the Q&A box or chat box. Maybe some of you were wondering why there was not so much discussion about Iran war. Well, to their defense, their final draft had to be submitted mid-February because this is April issue and it takes time for editing and processing the paper, almost a month. And I think the Iran war started the end of February. So those of you who would like to read analysis about that, please stay tuned because no doubt it's going to be covered in the next survey, which is August issue that is now being written. But anyway, we can discuss some aspect of it as well. So I'll start with some of the questions that are already being put in the question and answer box. There is a question from, is it Wang? Where exactly is Indonesia's productivity bottleneck sitting in the stack? Is it labor quality, capital allocation, or institutional coordination? Which of these is realistically fixable or can be adjusted inside one political cycle? How much of Indonesia's actual economic throughput is happening in informal relational networks that GDP doesn't capture, and thus chasing 8% risk disrupting that? So over to the authors, maybe you can say something about it. So
I
the
can
key
go first.
bottleneck. Yes, Kiki.
Okay, I think I'll cover a little bit of it, and then Ariandi and Imet, please feel free to cover it. These questions about productivity bottleneck and also, basically, what's the issue in, preventing us in growing even further, yeah? This can be two dissertations. So, I don't think this can be covered in one.
More.
Huh? More, okay, three dissertations. But it's all it's many things, and I think it's apa ya, it culminated in the form of resource misallocations. So one issue is of course whether the firm can, why firms are not innovating. One of the big push and growth, and many I think many, there are new interest on industrial policy and new papers on industrial policy, for example, in the past years. All of them say that the successful one is the one that push for as what Priyandi says, global value chain participation and innovations. But if you see the World Bank Enterprise Survey, only 6% of Indonesia's firm innovate, even the exporters. So there is a very low appetite to export. But if we think of all the high cost economy that the firm have go through in order for them to even stay afloat, then you kind of see, okay, fine. To stay afloat is already hard, then let alone to innovate. And I think I would like to take into account, is it capital allocation, institutional coordination, or labor quality? All of them in the form of, let me see, in the form of how the resource misallocation in the firm, yeah, in the producer side. So I think I have been saying this in many presentations before, that, for example, we have been putting lots of, red tape and, cost in business, higher cost in business, and actually felt by the firms that's supposed to be higher productivity, have higher productivity. For example, bribery incidence is higher for large firms relative to small firms, and even higher for exporters. So those firms that we think should be the engine of growth, in terms of not only improvement in labor quality, improvement in labor productivity, adding investment on innovations, for usually the large firm and exporters, they have to face this even higher red tape compared to others. So this resource misallocation have not been addressed profoundly, I think. So this also create kind of like a burden for the firm to grow, which should be the one, if firm grows, then we and especially the higher productivity firm grow, then we increase the aggregate productivity, right? Can this be fixable or adjusted inside one political cycle? To be honest, if it's that easy, then we should be already a high income economy. Unfortunately, I don't think this is easy, and we take into account that any political administration, even with the best intention, may also face hurdles. Some of the, I think Imet can also talk about this, like some of the work in, then, for example, in pushing for digitalization of regulation. It's trying to tackle some part of it, but not all. So as long as we still have this also kind of short-term adrenaline rush towards short-term return from extractive industries and commodity-based industries, then providing more incentive to strategic sector that may need longer-term investment is very hard. Yeah, so we need to, then it needs political will. It needs like pivot resources, and perhaps Danantara can be a lever in it, but perhaps also not. So it really depends on whether we provide the governance in doing so. Ariandi, on Imet, maybe
Very quickly before Riyandi probably will say that one of the main challenge at the moment is World Bank, I think, produced a good report about zombie firms, right? Like the firms that are staying are actually those who are not the most productive. There's a plenty of reason for that. But unless we solve that, it's probably going to be hard. And at the moment, I think the government is trying to. Red tape is one of the issue. I will probably add a little bit on that, which is at the moment Indonesia have a lot of ministries and governing bodies, right? If it's so hard to coordinate 20 ministries, I don't know if 40 will help us, right? And the spread the resources is spreading a little bit too thin because of that. So each ministry have a small budget, therefore they can't really make a good a good flagship program because you just don't have enough resources. You don't have enough people, you don't have enough budget. Of course, except for BGN maybe. Yeah. So I think that's one of the ways to do it, like consolidate a little bit of the governing bodies. But at the moment, of course, we also mentioned also about the increasing role of SOEs, right? Which is kind of the opposite of what we think should happen, which is a little less government instead of a bit too much. But it's heading that way. So I'm not sure whether we can sort of fix it. But yeah, over to you, Randy.
I think one of the big reason of why productivity is stalling in Indonesia case is we already seen this in many graphs. We know that our productivity is lagging much behind other countries. One of the big reason for that is we fail to attract productive firms and productive sectors to grow. So those are the big reason why our productivity is stalling. I mean, productivity can be into two sources. First is within productivity growth, which is the sector are growing, firms are growing. But the second is you need to more and more shift into more productive activity, which requires you productive firms, globally productive firms, and also companies that can advance you into that direction. So we fail to attract those companies, those sectors that I probably will attribute it to our trade and investment policies that are hindering our capacity to really attract the best and the most productive companies out there. So that's the area that I will likely tackle first. If the productivity is our main goal, and the second is the institution. So we lack clear guidance on how to do industrialization in a proper way to attract a proper productive industry and all that stuff, because we don't have clear guardrail on what to do. What we have right now is a ministry and or institution that are narrowly focused either on domestic production or domestic employment and only all that stuff. So the key performance indicator for industrialization or productivity is not really integrated yet. So we need a clear guidelines on what to achieve about industrialization, and it should be combining the goal of exporting, not only the goal of producing locally. So that's where the gain in productivity will come. But I will, in the short to medium run, I will attribute it the problem to our lack of, good trade and investment policy in attracting, the best and the brightest companies in the world that can give you productive firms and then productive winners in this global economy. So I think that's what makes productivity problematic in Indonesia.
Okay, thank you all. Still on the issue of growth and productivity, I will combine some of these questions. So first, from Gio, is asking about what actually are the new engines of growth that the government can utilize to reach that 8%, if possible. And if one of them is manufacturing, that is related to Fahri's question. How do we attract investment in advanced manufacturing industries in order to generate formal and high quality jobs? And maybe still related is a question from ADB about the limit, the 3% deficit limit. How do you think that is playing in this growth target of the administration? Maybe Krishna?
Uh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Randy,
you want to
mau.
start?
Please go ahead, Randy.
Okay. Probably I will try to speculate on the new engine of growth. Everybody can speculate, but if I want to speculate as well, is I think we need to see the engine of growth not only about the opportunity to grow, but also the opportunity to tackle climate problems. That's very important these days because this is very existential issues. That's why I probably, if I'm asked about this new engine of growth, is let's do the green economy or green industry, and we shouldn't look too far. It's already being started, and it's been coined. The term is the new three, which is the solar panel, EV, and battery. That also can be classified as advanced manufacturing to some level. But I think the idea right now is all of those investment in the solar panel, EV, and battery is in China, but Chinese players looks for new location to invest because of two things. Obviously, trade war and geopolitical uncertainty, but secondly is the fierce competition in the domestic economy in China. They call that involutionary competition, right? So those two are creating a pulling factor away from China. So that's the opportunity for other global south that are not part of the geopolitical alignment or geopolitical blocks, but are neutral. That I think Gita Gopinath terms that connector economy in one of the journals. So as a connector economy, we need to be smooth. We need to be as open as possible to attract that investment out of China, coming out of China when time comes. And that time already come right now. The solar panel already industry in China already investing in Indonesia, and because they're so efficient, we are getting anti-dumping duty from the U.S. because the U.S. is feeling that Indonesia's product invested from China is very cheap, very efficient, and that really they sell to the U.S. Really below the market price. But that's one of the evidence when we don't we relax the barriers in the trade and investment policy in some sectors, we really create an environment where the investment from the technological companies will come. And I know this is still the beginning because one of the stages that we need to start is the assembling part. So the EV, the assembling of EV battery, the battery for EV, we need to start with that. But then if we want to attract that, your local content requirement policy is problematic. So again, it's going back to circle. It's coming back again on what are the strategy and what are the current global condition. We would like to argue that given the global condition, we need to advance as much as possible the attraction of FDI, pulling away from China. And then after that, let's think about building more and more value chain domestically. But at the first start, we should not, play against the current global supply chain reallocation. I think that's where I want to start, and
Okay.
I will tackle the 3% later.
Okay.
Okay. I have actually in our chat group like divided what you're going to say. So just a little bit
Oh,
addition on Imat will tackle 3% a little bit. I will just tackle some. Many of the questions is about 8% and 8% as a goal, and this is what also kind of like motivate us in terms of writing the special case in our survey is that the 8% is not the outcome that we would like. 8% is just how we can get there. What we should get, aim for is, higher income countries, whether people are being able to, have a good livelihood, whether we reduce poverty and so on, whether we can still grow sustainably without harming more the nature. So I think the question is, and what our in our conversation when we write this is that, like, perhaps the problem is that, this ambition to have the 8% growth no matter what now. So that this ambition then create this connection to what we actually want to aim, which is, a better economy, a more inclusive economy, quality jobs for everyone. So the means to go there then is what we have suggested here in our paper, and also what Riandi just covered just before. For example, the right industrial policy, and also on top of it, I think we should also aim for we have this much resources in fiscal, and are we putting it into the right investment? I think I'll stop there for now. Imet would like to tackle 3%
Okay,
perhaps.
maybe I will add a little bit about the institution thingy. So I also read comments from Ross, which is very welcome. Thank you, Ross. The downside of increased participation of police is they're doing less of what they're actually has to do, right? And this is also what we're concerned about, because lots of the funding doesn't go to institutions that actually needs to do their job, to provide institutions that are needed to get the 8% growth that we want, right? So that's one thing. And secondly, I also want to add Riandi's comment about Indonesia as a destination for investors. There's during a lot of my work, there are actually lots of manufacturing firms trying to come in from abroad, but they just couldn't because one or two things. So one of them is technology, the other one is red tape, and of course the officers can't do their job well because the limited funding. But there's also red tape problems that, for example, one firm that I talked to told me that they need like 4 years of waiting time from start to actually make a production when investing in Indonesia. That's almost one cycle of politics, right? It was almost one period of presidency. That needs to change because the other region are faster, of course, without reducing quality. Hence, we also need resources on that regard. And on the 3%, I want to say a little bit on that, because when I was studying under Pak Acho, right, my first BS paper was about we need to relax that 3%. We need more debts. We need to deepen the capital market, right? But at the moment, when we're reaching 3%, the external finance are already leaving Indonesia. Now we're trading with USD at about 17,000 and going up and up. So the IDR is going down. It's not about whether it's 3%, I think. It's about how we are being responsible using it. Unfortunately, the market don't see that the fund that we use, the debt that we accumulate, translate to growth. And that needs to change. We need to convince them that the debt that we're making is good, right? And thus, because it's not convincing, that the debt is not convincing to make a optimal growth, that's why we need the limit, right? That's the thing. So I suppose at the moment, probably the limit is what's saving us from even more lower Indonesian rupiah. But I mean, we can argue about this. I'm pretty sure this needs to change. I still believe that we need a little bit more deeper capital, but not without enough trust. But Riandi probably want to say more about that as well, please.
Yeah, I think
Quickly, Riandi.
it's very important to follow up on the Krishna's comment that our debt or fiscal spending is not properly generating money for us because our tax to GDP ratio is still constrained, heavily constrained, and it's reducing over time. So within that environment, we do really believe that increasing the fiscal limit is not a good option. And no one has ever said that you only need to do the 3% limit, then you don't need to do anything else. Nobody ever said that. So I think the problem is we only keep the 3%, but not doing properly in terms of structural reforms. Or put it the other way, probably we only have a good minister of finance, but not the real sector minister, for example. So the problem is in the real sector. Tackling the problem in the real sector is the one that really hampering us for growing even further. So those objectives are not mutually exclusive. You can still at the 3%, but also growing if we tackle the growth problem or the structural problem properly. I know it's easier said than done, but in terms of the concept, I think we should not see the 3% as the hindrance to our growth. It's basically it's an anchor that keep us grounded, that keep us stable, credible. But you need the attacking anchor at the end of the day, and this attacking anchor is the one that we are lacking. So I think we really need to take that question more seriously right now. And also, we are also open with the idea of relaxing it, but at what cost? And I mean, what is the strategy? It's not about the 3% or 4%, 5%, but what's the cost? And is it the only way we can do higher growth by relaxing it, or is there any other way? And we care about growth not only because of growth, as Kiki said, but also social outcome. We need more proper formal employment creation and all that stuff. So to say that 3% is it really necessary? It really depends on whether you have an attacking lines, right? Whether you have a proper offensive strategy in promoting your growth. No one has ever said that you need to only have 3%, but you need to also tackle the real problem there, which we never really properly address, except for that one time when Trump announced a reciprocal tariff. But that's all.
Great, thank you. I'd like to shift gear a little bit, and I know I said that your paper is not so much about Iran war, but I'll ask this question anyway from Pak Greg Philly because I know maybe a lot of uh, others in the audience come to listen about this as well. So Pak Greg asked, can I ask about the likely consequences of the Iran war for Prabowo's economic plans, especially its inflationary effects and rising food prices?
Okay. I probably
Yeah,
can speak a little bit on that, Pak Acho.
yeah, go ahead.
But yeah, at the moment we probably have seen in the news, right? The non-subsidized fuel is going up, whereas the subsidy stays. At the moment, it's not clear to at least me how much fiscal burden is needed to keep fuel price from rising. But we know now for sure at the moment that a lot of because of the rise of motorcycle, this age is a little bit different compared to zaman Pak SBY during Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono. Now lots of lots of middle class, downward middle class now has also kendaraan, vehicles, have lots of motorcycles. Gojek also very strong at the moment in GDP as well as the logistics. So in a sense, the oil consumption, fuel consumption is going up, and even the lower middle income also use lots of oil. So increasing the price these days is no longer progressive, right? It's no longer only the rich pay for the fuel, because lots of lower middle also have cars and motorcycles. So now it's a little bit more complicated, but for sure it's gonna put pressure on the budget. I know also that there's a round of penghematan. What's the English word? That
Efficiency.
yeah, efficiency, more efficiency.
Austerity.
Austerity measures. Yeah, that's probably gonna come and doesn't look good. But we'll see. At the moment, at least we do still have some oil. But yeah, remains to be seen. For sure, we hope it's gonna end soon. But yeah, probably my other colleagues have.
Yeah.
Maybe I would like to add a little bit, yeah. When
Mhm.
we wrote this paper, I think we already face lots of, oh my God, hopefully this creates sense of crisis, like at that time, people already questions, there's so many things that we would like to put like in the macro updates, yeah, Mas Imat and Riandi, yeah, including, the questions about this, fiscal deficit that was officially 2.9%, yeah. So, but even due to the many other things, I think this is kind of like clouded in the, in the updates. We mentioned it, but on top of what other things happening. But even without Iran, I think crisis and the Hormuz, Iran without Iran war, and U.S.-Israel war. We would like to show kind of like sense of crisis, and we need, the government hopefully also feel that. So adding this, new external forces, I think we even more to have, we need to take into account this, limited fiscal space more seriously, and hence, put our budget into the right priorities. So I think, and if knowing that it's not only the government is the economy, right? The people is also the economy, household is the economy, private sector is the economy. So providing guidance, so the government should, I think, better communicate in how, people and firm mitigate this crisis, and take it as an, windows of opportunity to also, for example, reduce dependency on fuel subsidy, things like that. But this needs to be, thoughtfully and consciously done. I think that's it from me.
Okay.
All right, I just added a little bit. Uh, what I, at least me, what I believe is the theory of change behind government's delayed response in increasing the fuel price is two. First is there is Ramadan season and Lebaran season, and I'm grateful that the fuel prices doesn't happen at that time because I cannot imagine how chaotic the economy will be and the public will be if the fuel price increase around that time. But also the second one, the theory of change behind the government thinking is they are betting that the Iran war is not going to be protracted. But the theory is proven wrong right now. It will, I think, likely to be protracted and could be long. The US is blockading another blockage. So I think the theory of change has failed. And now we are seeing the change of narrative. We are already seeing that change of narrative. The MBG is being reshaped. We never imagined that story is being floated last year, for example. Last year, we cannot imagine that because all their thinking was that to use MBG as a driver of growth, right? To use that as driver of growth. Doesn't matter how much they are claiming it to be a nutrition program, but this is what they have in mind. But
Not
right
even
now, with
last year, even last month, no one
yes,
was
yes.
believing.
Even last month. That's right. That's so true. We cannot imagine this being circulated even last month. So I think government has already come into consideration that probably it will need to be raised even more. No, the not the Pertamax Plus, but this because it's funny because Pertalite is the subsidized fuel. It's being restricted. They have a quota system for that. You need to show the permit and all that stuff. But people actually buy Pertamax. So Pertamax is actually the realistic kind of subsidized gas right now, subsidized fuel right now, because people that previously bought Pertamax Turbo no longer able to hold that, to pay for that. Now they shift to buying Pertamax. So they're realizing it. And I do believe that they are really constrained in terms of money. So that's why they are thinking about relocating the subsidy, the MBG. So we are seeing a government right now that are realizing that everything is not going according to plan, and that's because of the Middle East crisis. But what we argue, even without the Middle East crisis, they will see the strain down in the middle of the year, perhaps, for example, not this early, but they will feel it because it all depends on the assumption of tax to GDP ratio of 10.5, which is increasing 1.2 percentage point from last year. That means 20% of income tax. That's not realistic. Only happen during commodity boom, right? So we are now seeing a more realistic government that are occurring faster than we expected. Then that's because of the Middle East crisis. And I still remember, I think when you go into government, you become realistic. But we see from Prabowo administration, their mode is the mode of campaigning still. Even for last year, right? They want to promote all the campaign program, but now I think they are entering a stage of governing, real governing, and we are started to really see that. We are not for sure how far they will go, but we are started to see that, and that's because Iron War.
As you mentioned MBG many times, and including in your presentation, let's go there. There's a question by Permata. Is there any evidence that MBG, the free meals program, or KDMP, the village cooperatives program, actually create jobs? And NAFA takes that to political economy context. Who has the president's ear in terms of economic decision making? Uh, how can, as you mentioned, that the underlying assumption of agriculture-driven growth is not sound, for instance, how can that be changed, or who can sway the government away from big spending programs like MBG?
I'll try to tackle the KDMP first, the
Yeah.
corporation, right? I think, well, first of all, it is interesting that as long as I know, corporation is some sort of a grassroots programs, right? It start from the members of the corporation that feel the need, have the same vision, and feel the need to create some sort of a semi-corporate to fulfill what they wanted as a unit, as a village, or whatever. But this KDMP is coming from the top, which means it's a sort of a top-down a thing that's go against what cooperation means. Of course, we can argue whether I'm right or wrong. But at the moment, what we've seen is the cooperation seems to be some sort of a retailer. We're not sure where they get the goods. But if that's the case, then possibly they are actually competing against the current retailers. So for now, at least I can't say for sure what other 80,000 cooperatives are working on. Are they sort of homogen, or they have some sort of a characteristic of the region? What sort of a market failure they tackle is not clear to me. But for sure is that the funding that is used to help them is it's gonna be cicil apa ya? The
Install.
the installment is gonna be paid by APBN, by the government budget. So this similar to what I think like the previous Karya BUMN Karya, the SOE construction SOE, right? Where instead of using government budget to pay for project, they ask for the SOE to lend and then pay for the lending, right? This is kind of similar. So the KDMP, the government asked Agrinas to help KDMP building things. So the loan was made by the Agrinas, and then the government is going to be paying for it. So this is a bit similar to me, how to avoid the 3% limit by asking BUMN to do it, but eventually it's gonna hound the APBN again in the end. But yeah, unfortunately, I don't have lots of information on KDMP, but my two other colleagues probably want to answer or tackle the next question.
I would like to tackle a little bit on Permata's questions, whether there is an evidence. To the best of my knowledge, there is not yet any proper impact evaluation on MBG nor KDMP. Some studies provide kind of like estimation, but this is not evidence. So actually, I think many scholars encourage and will be happy to support and provide causal impact evaluation. And hence, in order to be able to do, the best way, the proper impact evaluation, the rollout of the MBG and KDMP needs to be pilot in terms of pilot, and also, instead of like directly big, then we need to do it in small chunks first. So I think, given as what Riyandi mentioned just before, given now, this external risks have kind of pushed the government to be more aware that they need to be more thoughtful and strategic in using the budget, then perhaps we can then finally do properly impact evaluation of MBG and KDMP.
Yeah, just a small addition to that. I think we haven't seen any report because of very early implementation on the program. But what has been floating around is the number created by the government, assuming that all the jobs created by MBG and KDMP is new jobs. So that's why you often see 1.5 million jobs from MBG or KDMP also around that number. That's assuming that all the jobs created by freelance program and KDMP is new job, and none of them are shifting around. And what we believe are, because this is the general equilibrium principle in the economy, those jobs could be non-new jobs. Those jobs could be like people working in agriculture moving to the MBG kitchen, for example. That doesn't mean they move into more productive sectors. We never know. So that needs to be proven first. So unless the MBG kitchen provides better productivity, better salary, so we will not see the productivity improvement out of that program. And about the economic decision making, there are two powerful forces right now. First is the crisis. The second is we know already about this. The people surrounding Prabowo, we know for sure that has been the people that monitoring political situation about Indonesia already know about this for quite some times. But I think some people say that there has been encouraging progress. I think from the government side, they try to invite more and more new circle, new people to the table with Prabowo to discuss things. But some skeptics say that it is tailor-made, it is directed, it's but we need to appreciate at least the progress that has been made in this sphere because it's not easy and work from there. So I think the one that really controlling economic decision making is still the same circle as we know for sure before. But I just sense that there are more opportunity right now to say to say some input. Maybe some of my colleague will disagree with me, but I just sense that they are now moving into more open. This is very encouraging, I think, but we don't know for sure, of course, how to what extent they really incorporate the input, right? So that's why external pressure always be a more credible friends to push us into more discipline, like the crisis, like the we of course we don't want the crisis, but it turns out that our only friends to make us more disciplined is the crisis. And also the US in terms of trade policy, right? In terms of the ART, but ART also has its own downside that we need to navigate. That I believe that we need to really dramatically revise that before we see any benefit for our side. So yeah, I think those are that probably if I can speculate those two forces right now that are surrounding Prabowo's ability to make economic policy, not only influence but ability as well.
Thank you, Randy. Before we move away from MBG, I was curious when you say that as a parent, you can actually say yes or no to MBG. So what happens if you refuse the meals? Does it go to waste or does it go to another student?
For what I know, the parents need to agree within that school, Pak. So if you only
Mm,
say no, you still have it. But if that school decide no, then it will find another school. So it has happened to my kids' school. They are offering
yeah.
MBG, but because my kids' school refuse it, they need to find other school that wants it. So it really depends on the
Or,
negotiation between teachers and parents.
or a school can refuse to get MBG allocation.
Yes, yes, they can.
Okay,
But it might not go down very easily. They are not going down very
right.
easily. But you can try. School can try, can always try, and it's better always for school to really determine within themselves what's best for them, right? And we are now seeing also Ibu Nani, at least the Vice Minister for in BGN, say that it is in the within the rights of school to say no or even parents at some point also some ministers said but it's just not operative enough to have some student given portion and other student have no school meal. So
Mm,
to the best of my knowledge it is always the case that school refuse the MBG rather than person.
okay, thank you. We only have 2 more minutes, so I'll close with a question from Pak Hari Baskoro. It's about Bank Indonesia credibility and burden sharing issue. But because he uses a lot of soccer lingo that I don't understand, so I will shift this burden to Riandi, who started this uh, problem from early on. So I hope you can read and tell us what the question is really is, Riandi, and tackle it.
Yeah. So I think the question is similar to before. What is the exit strategy? But this question is more into the burden sharing. Probably Imet will tackle more about the burden sharing, but I will tackle only the question of what institution that should draw the line if the burden sharing becomes a non-viable to push us beyond 5%. I think the commitment should come from the president itself, right? And none other. And the president then coming down to the bottom. We are seeing confusion all around. At one point, we know that the government wants to maintain the macro prudence and want to maintain fiscal credibility, but they do the other thing, right? So that needs to be addressed and that needs to be fixed first. So the commitment, the guardrail, is the president itself. You cannot intervene with the BI. You cannot intervene with the fiscal credibility. That's the start that I can think of, and I think the one that can blow the whistle is the macroeconomic indicators, right? The bond yield, the currency, the inflation, all those indicators are the proper reverie, right? So if you have a fractured backline and an uncoordinated backline, doesn't matter how much attacking line you have, it will blows back to your stability. And with that stability, your growth is not going to translate into real prosperity to the people because inflationary pressure and all that stuff, right? So that's the importance of having a very solid, not only defensive line in terms of stability, but also the attacking lines. 3% and BI credibility is important only that far. You need a very good attacking line. But this is the defensive line. It's also all that matters. Look at Chelsea back in Jose Mourinho's era. Without all that tall defensive line, they concede a lot of goals, right? But it really comes down to Didier Drogba at that time to really put on some goals, right? So without that, I'm having difficult times in understanding how will the investment on or how will the firms will come to Indonesia and have certainty that macroeconomically we are going to be stable. So that problem is why we need to ensure that our defensive line is strong enough to weather anything.
I will add the lingo as well. So Riandi mentioned, there's a Pierluigi Collina in there, right? So I think the problem we have at the moment is the Collina, the referee, is also play the game. If that's what happens with the burden sharing, right? So that's who actually has to discipline the game, is actually play with the rest, become the game. And eventually, what's the point in watching football if that's the case, right? And the end, if nobody buys a ticket to the football match, that's where the penalty is going to have come to Indonesia. And you have seen the external financing that's now drying out a little bit, and the keep devaluing rupiah. That's basically the penonton, Pak Haru. Thanks.
If I
Thank
may
you.
a little bit, Pak, sedikit aja. So
Yeah,
on
sure.
burden sharing ya, one of the biggest part of the burden sharing right now is to finance KDMP ya, for example, cooperative village. So I think reiterating what Riandi and Imat says, people and the market can really see whether you're actually having good faith, put your words into action or not. So what we have seen, for example, I understand Riandi have like a big enthusiastic, approach on how the government has now welcome maybe critics or inputs. We need to see it like whether you walk the talk, right? For many of the decisions have been made and will have like a long-term repercussion or consequences. For example, KDMP bought Agrinas for KDMP bought 150,000 trucks completely built up from India, right? We need to take into, this just happened a couple of months ago, but this will be paid over the next 6 years by fiscal or fiscal revenue, by fiscal budget. So this is just one part of it that we have done so much in the past couple of months only, with relatively long term, 6 years ahead as a consequences. And I think what everyone will, if you increase this burden sharing more, and also or commit more to the burden sharing, or increase 3% budget deficit, it's all again, okay, what are you going to do with the money that you will, that you get? So if you will just, instead of, fixing transportation, since, the head of the Agrina said, I need this type of truck because the area is very remote, not every kind of car can enter it, then why not fixing the road, right? It creates like a really interesting way of thinking of like what kind of solution for what kind of problem, and everyone sees it. Yeah, so I think again, as the whistleblower, the Pierluigi Corina, thankfully I know who is it. Is a very
The
famous
most
bold
popular referee on the
Italian
planet.
popular wasit referee. That's the only one I know. Is, rupiah, a bond yield, that have been giving, short-term signal. The actual also big signal that we should also watch out is FDI. Our FDI have been relatively lower compared to other, competitors. So of course there's more worse economy, but in times of 5% growth, why we have seen a very low, relatively low FDI on top of it during the time of FDI reallocations. So low confidence on even longer term. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, I think I should start watching soccer too. But as a good visitor to Australia, I've been watching footy, a better one. Uh, anyway, well, with that, thank you so much. I'd like to again appreciate very highly your time, your availability, Krishna, Riandi, and Kiki. This has been really good. We learned a lot. I learned a lot. And this exchange from Indonesia, Amsterdam, Japan, Krishna, Australia. So thank you all for your participation and your patience. I know some of you have put other questions in the chat box, but unfortunately, we don't have much time at the moment. So we're gonna make sure to give your comments and questions to the speakers as input. With that, again, thanks for the speakers, and I give it back to Lydia. Thank you so much.
Thank you again, everyone. I would like to let everyone know to participate in our future activities. We have the study lecture on the 5th of May, and also Indonesia Project's annual conference, the biggest conference that we hold every year, is already up in the announcement. So I'll put that link in the chat below, but also please check our website. Thanks again, everyone. Bye.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks so
Thank
much,
you, Riandi.
everyone. Later.
Imet.
Bye-bye.
Acho, may I know who's
ucapkan.
the next writer? Oh, sorry.
Di WA aja, WA.
It's Sekar, Juventus, Sekar, and Jerry. Bulgaria.
Oh, okay. Pas
update?
dong nih makro.
Amro team.
Dadah.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
everyone.
Thank you, Mbak Lydia, for
Kali
organizing.
siang.
You're welcome. See you.
Thank you, Mas Ujang. Thank you, Pak Aco. You live ya.